Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast.
We are closing in on 40. This is our 37th episode. Things are starting to pick up in traffic and reviews, so we're really excited because our reach is starting to grow.
Yeah, not only our reach, but our education, man. I think that as time goes on, we become more and more knowledgeable of the breadth and depth of the food startups environment, and so we're able to provide the listeners the value.
Yeah, man, I think so. And I think we're also, because we have another interview today, we're getting a little better at interviewing, which makes sense. Just anything that you do, the more you do it, usually the better you're going to get. So I'm hoping that we're slowly but surely improving our interviewing skills. Danny, I had a call from a former guest, Juan Luis, telling me about this event in Medellin, and I know you're going to go. I have to say I've already done one last-minute preparation for a trade show, and it's a lot of work. I don't quite have this one in me, but I know you're going, so why don't you tell us about your event coming up later this week?
Well, I won't be able to make it.
I guess you couldn't handle the stress either.
I will have a presence there. Because I've been up in the States for a little while. I've been able to coordinate in anticipation of the conference, this conference/food festival called Maridaje, which basically showcases the best of food and beverage and desserts and that sort of thing in Medellin. Over 40,000 people come, and it's a great way to get a brand name out there. And so my company will be representing the cacao-related products, and we have several partnerships with some booths there. So while I'll have some help on the ground with some employees, and I will also have these booths kind of heading up the show. It should be pretty fun, man. It's actually going to be interesting kind of being away from the action, but kind of trying to consult on best practices, what to do, what not to do, get everything set up. Because the last thing you want, and Matt, I know you know this, the last thing you want is having a plan, and then when the day hits, having the plan all go to hell, and then you have to just kind of run with it. Like, that's what we want to prepare ourselves for, is to not have to encounter that situation.
Yeah, and sometimes it might be inevitable, but that's cool. That's cool that you are able to get a presence there, and you'll still have free time for other stuff, because this is a 4-day festival. Like we've talked about before, the next event that I do, I really want to choose and go out, because I'll tell you what, man, this trade show is the perfect place to make contacts, but I'm starting to look at contacts differently. Maybe this is just a maturity thing, but Danny, maybe when you're younger, you're a lot wiser now. But this has happened to me even like a year ago. When you meet someone and they're big talker and they have all these connections and they have all this money and they know this person that runs this store and this store, it sounds really, really cool. But I'm really looking like connections now where I used to get so excited, and now I'm like, wow, well, it's probably not going to lead into anything, but there's a small chance. So I just know that, Danny, I think it's really cool that you're going to have a presence in this show. There's going to be some leads that come in. I think you got to capture the leads, knowing that, especially in food, meet people, and when you're a little bit more naive, this person, they have contacts to 26 restaurants, blah, 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 blah. And most of them are probably not going to work out, but eventually you can make some contact going through hundreds and hundreds where something really opens the door for you. So I really hope you find something there.
Well, listen, first, one thing on conferences that I'd like to do more and more of later next year is have volunteers. That means not just have team members, but have people that are passionate about products and somehow volunteer, because I've learned this through going through the best conferences. The best conferences always have more staff than they need. Things always go wrong. If you're a booth, if you're the conference, if you're the conference that's putting on the conference, things always go wrong. So one less, I hope to basically have backup plans going into this conference while not being there, because I know things are going to go wrong. And then what you said before about having contacts that are kind of like folks that probably slow sales cycles or bad opportunities or things like that. Man, that always happens. And that's the game of sales, is basically be a good guy. Who knows who you might meet? And you're probably not going to meet the people that you need to meet, but over time you will. You'll meet one, and then you'll meet two, and then you'll meet three, and then before you know it, you're going to have 15 customers, and then you'll have almost a business. I mean, who knows? But that's kind of how I've seen things work in previous companies I've worked at. That's kind of the feeling I get in food as well.
I'm all with you with extra employees. Extra people there is really important.
Yeah, and honestly, if there's one thing that I've learned about conferences, it's just to be a good dude and to have fun. No reason to exhaust yourself. That means if you're going to a conference, and Matt had an entire episode dedicated to this before, but if you're going to a conference, stay near the conference if you're visiting, relax, be a good guy, and then these opportunities kind of tend to work out based on the power of the universe.
So, Danny, I have maybe talked about this on the podcast before, but sometimes I go into a co-working space. Have you ever been part of a co-working type vibe?
In New York, about 3 years ago, I was part of a small incubator where I was able to rent out a desk for $100 a month right by Union Square in Manhattan. It was like the best deal ever. And I met tons of creative types there. I was unfortunately moving to Columbia at that time. But when you're in an office with creative minds, these creative minds somehow think in ways that most people in cubicles don't. And they introduce you to all sorts of different people. So it was a great experience for me.
That's cool. Well, today we have a guest today that has his own incubator.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the Organic Food Incubator. They're located in New York City, and I have the wonderful opportunity to actually be visiting them, seeing what they're all about, and giving you guys the scoop.
That's great. Well, Danny, why don't you introduce our guest?
We have Mike Schwartz of Bow Food and Drink with us. I'm sitting next to Mike right now in Long Island City in Queens, not too far from where I was born. Mike, thanks a lot for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Now, Mike, you've been in the food business for a while. What was the first experience you had in food in a business context?
Well, my first experience in food was being a dishwasher. I started absolutely at the bottom. Over the years, I rose in the ranks and ended up in some management positions. So I got a little bit more experience with bookkeeping and food cost and how numbers work and all of that. And then finally in 2009, we made our first adventure into our own business. So we started Bow.
Okay. And so do you think that dishwasher experience, when I was growing up, I used to hear about people that rose through the ranks in their companies. Has it really led you to understand fundamentally this brick and mortar type product? When you work in the food industry, do you kind of feel like you understand it completely? It's a broad question, but
yeah, I mean, I think when I look to hire people now, I tend to hire at the entry level, at the very bottom, and then promote them from within. And I think a lot of that's because of where I started. And I think it makes a much more well-rounded employee. And for sure, I mean, there are all those reality shows about the owners of the business going back and taking like the low rung job. And if you don't understand how your business works from the bottom up, there's opportunity for lost money. There's opportunity for wasted labor time. So it makes you definitely a much more well-rounded boss.
Looking at the Organic Food Incubator and especially thinking of rent in New York City, how integral was the idea to have an incubator where you can charge other people for the space and make more income on the space and your decision to become an incubator?
Well, the incubator was the second business. So I think if we started the incubator as our primary business, we never would have done it in Long Island City. I mean, it just doesn't make sense financially to do it in New York. The rent, as you said, is incredibly high. The overhead, everything becomes more expensive. The garbage, the electricity, the water is much higher here in the city. And as much as I'd like to be part of New York City, I don't think it was the best choice. I think there are a lot of surrounding areas outside of New York City that would be better suited for incubators. But this is the space we had. And we saw a huge need for this. And there is a certain cachet to manufacturing your product in New York. So the businesses that we attracted from the very beginning were thrilled to be able to stay in New York City, produce their product, and have a home here rather than going to the Hudson Valley or New Jersey or somewhere in rural Pennsylvania.
So maybe, I don't know, I think the novelty of being in the New York City limits, maybe that does have a value add. Is it possible that after all the higher rent and utility costs, that because of the way it attracts customers, it could actually work out to your favor?
It's possible. I mean, I think it has. With hindsight, I think it has done pretty well. For sure, like I said, the companies that are here really are glad. They want to be New York companies. So it works on a small scale. I think what they're going to find, and what I'm finding, is as you grow and you take on more real estate, that they almost inevitably have to move out of New York City to be profitable. If you want to have room for a marketing budget and advertising and all that stuff, something has to give. And a lot of times it's the rent.
Absolutely. Now, I'm thinking about what Matt was just saying, high rent, kind of having the Organic Food Incubator, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and I'll actually introduce properly in a second. It sounded like this sort of evolved, and it sounds like you come from a background of knowing how food works. Was it scary starting up in 2009? Were you thinking at some point, what are we doing? We're getting into food. It's impossible. Or were you really confident that this is something that could work?
Well, when we started Bao, I was kind of bullied into it by a very, very good friend and business partner, Mike Brady. And he hounded me for years about starting a business together and how we're going to knock them dead. And I was very adamant about doing something that was health oriented. And so we came up with this idea, and we kind of did it as a joke just to see if we could do it. We didn't invest a lot of money in it. We didn't invest a tremendous amount of time in it in the beginning until it started to be successful. And then I think what entrepreneurs find is the more successful you are, the more money you have to dump into the project. And it should be the other way around, but that's not how it is. So Bao started as a kombucha company, and Bao stands for Badass Organics. And as we looked around the marketplace, we saw that most organic products are oriented towards women. The labels are beautiful. They often have flowers, and they're very delicate. And we're guys, and we ride motorcycles. And Mike was a big weightlifter. I studied martial arts, and we wanted something that was male oriented. And so we picked this name, Badass Organics. And once we got successful, it kind of backfired on us. So we had to trim it down, and we started to just use the initials. And we found that a lot of groceries don't really want the word ass on the labels of products. So it was kind of a joke. And yeah, it started as kombucha. And our real goal was to make soda. But we found that the kombucha culture was very stable, and we were going to use that to make the soda. But the kombucha was so successful, we just decided to ride with it. Once we moved over to Queens and we had much more space, we branched out. So kombucha now is a very small part of our sales. And we sell a lot more of our fermented vegetables and sauces, and we have these little fermented energy shots that have taken over. And the kombucha kind of takes a back seat.
And listeners, just to make sure we're clear here for you guys, they have the incubator that they started after they began their kombucha company. And Bao, it says using the 7,000-year-old method of fermentation. Now, is that just saying that all types of kombucha use this type of fermentation, or is this how you guys differentiate yourselves from other kombucha and fermented drink companies?
No, the 7,000-year-old method refers more to lacto fermentation, which is the oldest method of preservation. It's been around for it's documented at least 7,000 years. And everybody uses the same basic method, whether they're making kombucha or they're making fermented vegetables, or the rules surrounding fermentation are exactly the same. It was just a little catchphrase for us.
Now, if I can jump in for a second, I was just thinking about this kind of fermentation and kombucha. And I was going back. I was thinking about like 2007 or 2005 when I was still in college, and I would hear once in a while about kombucha, and I would hear that people were selling kombucha on Craigslist, or they're selling cultures and stuff like that. How did this, and we've seen this kombucha craze evolve over the years, and now you have Bao kind of riding the wave and you differentiated. How did you guys become a real kind of established company where you passed all the health inspections, where you educated yourselves? Did you have to find consultants? Did you have to just make mistakes and learn from them? Were you so good in food before with your experience that you could anticipate all this? What were some of the things that you went through that were just struggles?
we both drank kombucha. Kombucha, it's been around for a long time. It went through a huge craze in 30s in Germany. It was very popular. And there was a big resurgence of interest in kombucha in the United States in mid 90s with GTs, and they have the majority of the market share. And there are quite a few smaller kombucha companies around that share the other. I think GTs has about 80% of the market. So the rest of us share 20% of the market. And as kombucha companies go, we're very small. And when we started, the health department, we're regulated by the New York State Department of Agriculture, and which happens to be a great organization. They're fantastic to work with. They're very helpful when it comes to regulation and licensing, and they always answer the questions, and they're very forthcoming. With that said, they didn't really understand fermentation, and they for sure didn't understand small food manufacturers. These governmental organizations are built for industry. So they're built to regulate Tyson, they're built to regulate Unilever, and when you throw at them a small company that's run by the owners or worked by the owners, and they don't really know how, it kind of throws a wrench in their system. They don't really know how to deal with it. And when you throw at them fermentation, they are all about pasteurization and keeping things out of the danger zone and heat, and fermentation is all about the opposite, keeping things warm. And so we had to do a tremendous amount of education. And
what were some of those interactions like? I can't imagine. Would you just call them up and you guys were talking just different languages? Did they have to come down and visit? Did you have to?
Yeah, well, so the way it works is you apply for a license and then you move into your space and then they come and inspect you. And so, of course, they came in and the space was clean. The refrigeration was at the right temperature. It had all of the requisite sinks and soap and cleaners, and everything was perfect, except for the fact that we kept our liquid at 75 degrees, which is considered the danger zone. And so
What's the danger?
The danger zone is 41 to 140. And so when you work in restaurants and normal food manufacturing, everything has to be either cold or hot. In that area, in that danger zone, is where bacteria grows. Well, we wanted to grow bacteria. When you make bread, when you make wine, you make beer, kombucha, fermented vegetables, any of those things, you need to be in that danger zone. So they were like, well, this can't be right. And so then I went back and started to do some documentation. So I've made sauerkraut since I was in random restaurants, probably since I was 20. So I know how it works, but I didn't know all of the documentation. I didn't know all of the research behind it necessarily. So I had to go back, and it's all available on the internet. You pull all kinds of research material about how salt kills off the pathogens, how the good bacteria wants to be in this certain pH zone. And I just gave them a huge notebook full of documentation, information. I tried to put it into the context where they would understand it. So kombucha has a tremendous amount of lore around it, and people think it's this mystical thing, but basically it's like making vinegar. So I explained to them that it's like making vinegar, and then they're like, oh, vinegar. Oh, makes sense. So I put it in the context that they would understand, and all of a sudden the doors started to open, and it was easy.
Mm-hmm. And Did you have other startup friends or food companies kind of guiding you through this? You mentioned.
No.
So how did you guys figure out that you needed to have these sponges in the first place outside of did you just look online
to make the kombucha?
To get the setup right outside of the danger zone issue with kombucha?
Right.
How did you guys know that you needed to set up this type of kitchen?
Oh, well, I've been in the food business for a really long time, as we already discussed, and the rules are all the same. And what we didn't know, which we know now, is that all the rules are available to you if you know where to look. So if you go to the FDA website, you can download, it's called Good Manufacturing Practices. And that's the rule for the entire country. Now, every jurisdiction applies those rules a little bit differently, so it needs a little bit of tweaking. But for the most part, if you've been around food for a long time, you know the basics. You know how to, I know how to set up I've built enough restaurant kitchens, and I knew how to set up a commercial kitchen. There are certain differences, and I was shocked at how different food manufacturing is from cooking in a restaurant kitchen, but there is a lot of crossover as well. So we get over a lot of the rough spots with that, and no one would really help us. I mean, everybody was, at the time, what was this, 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, everybody was very secretive about their process. Nobody wanted to share information, and none of the bigger companies wanted to talk to you because you're a little guy. We didn't want to invest a tremendous amount of money to hire a consultant. And so we basically just went at it and just knocked down all the barriers as we went along.
I want to pose as someone in New York that has a new product. Let's say they have a organic energy drink and they're in the initial phase of testing it out with friends, maybe selling it on a very, very small scale. And they come across the Organic Food Incubator, and you guys offer co-packer, kitchen space, coaching, business education. Can you walk me through, let's say, a typical small startup that comes to your kitchen?
Sure. So what we've done is we've set up a bunch of surveys on our website. And so depending on what you're interested in, you go to the website, you open up the survey, you fill it out, you give us a bunch of information. Typical for entrepreneurs, they don't want to give away their secret because they think it's the most important thing. So the recipe is the hardest thing to get from them. And I don't really necessarily want the recipe, but I need the method, because if I don't know your method, I can't help you. So getting over that hurdle usually involves some kind of mutual NDA to make them feel comfortable. And then, so once I have that survey, I'll contact them and we'll set up a time for a meeting. And that usually involves a tour of the facility. We have a little one-page brochure that we give everybody that walks in that has the basic requirements. So when they leave, they know what licensing they need, what insurance they need, how much it costs, and all in one little document. And then they get a little tour. I take you on a little tour of the facility, show you where you might be working. We offer a couple of different options as far as workspace goes. And then if you want co-packing, that's a completely separate conversation. There's kind of a very limited number of products that will co-pack. Just because to make it cost effective for us, we have to have the machinery to do it. And people come in and they want me to co-pack their dry gluten-free brownie mix. And I'm just not set up for that. I'm set up for filling like hot chocolate, basically, if you can see those two differences. So I'll direct them probably to one of my friends that is set up for that, or another organization that might be able to help them. And then we'll discuss pricing for co-packing, we do small batch co-packing. So we typically do 50 gallons at a time, whereas normal co-packers do 3,000. So for a small startup, it's a good, easy entry for them. And then you'll leave with hopefully a lot of knowledge. And if you don't have enough knowledge, we'll set up some times for coaching, which we do on a month-to-month basis. So there's really no long-term commitment. Or you can just book time in the kitchen once you have all the requirements.
Gotcha. And one follow-up on that. So on average, I come in here with a new product. To get an organic certification, a USDA Organic certification, how much time and money are we talking about?
If you were to do it yourself, so the way it's set up, it's kind of convoluted. It runs all through the USDA. And the USDA subcontracts to a number of licensing organizations like Oregon Till, QAI, and various others. And then they, in turn, subcontract the inspections to a licensed inspector, basically. So what you have to do, you have to contact one of these subcontractors. You fill out a bunch of paperwork, whatever they require. Usually involves, or definitely involves, where you're purchasing your ingredients, the type of machinery you're using, how your space is laid out, how you're going to make sure that your organic product doesn't come into contact with non-organic product, the type of chemicals you use. And depending on the organization and the complexity of your process, it could run from $4,000 to $7,000 a year. I mean, there are some opportunities to do it a little bit less expensively, and there are some opportunities where certain states offer a little bit of cash incentive to be certified organic. But it's an expensive endeavor, and it's tremendously time-consuming.
And so we talked a little bit about the organic certification, and we talked about sourcing and making sure that we don't mix organic and non-organic. Do you guys just kind of jump into this? Matt and I talk about HACCP a lot because we operate from South America, where there's not that much HACCP programs. There aren't many HACCP certifications. Do you have to certify, or do you work with folks to create a HACCP plan along with this kind of organic certification?
So HACCP is very similar to organic certification in that there's a paper trail. And that's all these certifications are similar in that way. They want to make sure, in the case of organic certification, that there's no crossover to prohibited chemicals or prohibited food ingredients. The HACCP wants to make sure there's no crossover with potential health issues and contaminants. So, I mean, they're not exactly the same, but there is a lot of similarity. In the United States, you're not required to be HACCP certified yet unless you're doing meat, shellfish, or juice, raw pressed juice right now. The FDA is working on some kind of a modification between GMPs, good manufacturing practices, and HACCP. And they're going to institute that for everyone because HACCP is kind of cost prohibitive for the small business. So they're trying to come up with some kind of in the middle solution that protects the consumer, but also is a little bit stronger than GMPs.
Is HACCP cost prohibitive? I was looking at a Kickstarter the other day about a Kickstarter for creating a HACCP for a salami company in Wisconsin. And I know that they're required to have a HACCP certification.
Yep.
And it sounds like to me what you need to do in order to be successful at creating a good, strong HACCP plan is really know these critical points where you need to know where your dangers are. And you can't just be like, hey, okay, we're just going to keep this away from the cold. You have to know to what extent. You have to know. And so it's almost like the secret sauce is actually just being able to understand how these processes work and then evaluate them over time with continuous studies. Is that kind of right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you can do, like, because I'm not legally required to do a HACCP plan, I can take a HACCP course, and write my own HACCP plan. Once the regulation changed, so for if I had a raw juice company, I would have to be HACCP certified to be able to write that plan. I mean, there's a lot of gray area. It's not difficult to write a HACCP plan if you understand sanitation. Keep the food off the floor. I mean, it's relatively basic. A lot of it, for people who've been in the food business, there's a lot of common sense. For people that haven't been in the food industry, it's quite a bit of a learning curve, but it's not insurmountable. And for a few $100s, you can take a course and have a pretty good idea of what you're supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to be doing. Organic certification is the same way. You can read the manual. It's a few hundred pages, the National Organic Plan, and put out by the USDA, and know the rules and follow the rules. But in order to be certified, you have to have some kind of oversight.
Mm-hmm.
And a tremendous amount of documentation and endless audits. And I have to keep documentation for 5 years, and I have to prove where the vegetables came from, what farm they came from, how they got to me, what I did with them, and who I sold them to. I have to know that entire chain of custody, basically.
Yeah, it sounds like another bookkeeper.
Yeah, right. It is a lot. I mean, larger companies have a regulations officer, somebody that takes care of all that.
I wanted to just talk a little bit about the Organic Food Incubator now. What's going on? Who are your clients, the companies you work with? What are things looking like?
So we have, I think, 22 resident clients and about 30 or so, call them micro businesses, for lack of a better term, because they're not small. They're really small. And so the resident businesses rent space, permanent space, and they have their homes here, and they do all their manufacturing here. The majority of the spaces are a little greater than 200 square feet. We do have some that are a little bit larger. We have 2 that are around 800 square feet, a few that are about 600 square feet. But we found through a lot of experimentation that a new startup needs about 200 square feet. If you take away the bathrooms, the storage, the common areas, you need about 200 square feet of workspace, which is not available in New York City for anyone. So it becomes very precious space. So these companies, we offer them a short-term lease. It's a month-to-month lease, but most of them have been here for over 2 years. And then we offer the micro companies a daily space or a shift space where they'll come in, they might work once or twice a week and maybe once a month and make their product and then go sell it. It's a legal, clean space.
And Mike, do you have a list of, I don't know if this is confidential or not, but do you have a list of clients and companies that are working out of your space so we could list them on our website?
Yeah, we have it listed on our website, on the Organic Food Incubator website under community. It's a little bit out of date, but because I'm kind of doing everything by myself, but it's a little behind, but it's relatively accurate. I'd be happy to give you a list.
Okay.
It's an interesting mix of companies. We're kind of heavy in the pressed juice industry. I think we have 4 or 5 pressed juice companies, a couple more beverage companies, including ours, including Bow. But then we have a company that makes bitters, artisanal bitters called Hella Bitter, and they're fantastic alternative to mass-produced bitters. They make great cocktails, and they're doing a fantastic job here. We have a company called Lollyware that makes edible cups, Simply Gum that makes chewing gum. So it's more interesting for me now when we get companies that aren't making beverages. One of our most successful companies is called Free Bread, and they make probably what I think is the best gluten-free bread in the country. I mean, it's the best I've had. And they've been here for 3 years, and they moved from a really small space to one of our larger spaces. So it's nice to see somebody succeed as well.
Yeah, and I imagine you guys have learned so much through seeing the life cycles of different companies as they've evolved from the micro businesses and grown larger. And the fact is that every business is different. But have you guys been able to kind of take a look at the cross-section of companies you've had and said, listen, all the companies that have been successful share 1, 2, 3 things maybe? Can you share that with?
Yeah, sure. First thing is that nobody wants to do when they start off is have a bookkeeper. I mean, it is essential. And almost all of us here have gone through the experience of not having a bookkeeper and then having to get the books fixed. So that if you want to raise capital, if you want to find an investor, if you want to get a loan, you have to have good books.
What are the mistakes that people make with bookkeeping? They don't do them.
Well, yeah, I mean, you get behind. So it becomes one of those extra things that you have to do. So you do it like when you get home from work at night and you get sloppy and you forget to invoice or you misplace things, or it's just, you need somebody that is experienced. Look, I'm a cook. You're a chocolate maker. The gum people make the fantastic chewing gum, but they don't know the first thing about accounting. It is a special brain that can wrap their head around accounting. And there are rules that you have to follow to make it easy to file taxes. So if you don't do this from the beginning, it costs exponentially more money down the road to have a bookkeeper fix everything and then an accountant do the taxes. It's just such a waste of money. So it's worth a small investment. You hire a bookkeeper, they work 1 or 2 hours a week from the beginning. They just put everything in the right place. So that, I think, is key. The other thing is you have to absolutely believe in your product. If you have to live it, I reek of fermentation. It's like you have to believe it. The companies that succeed are the ones that are not afraid to go out there and say, my product is great and you should be eating this. And I mean, that's why Free Bread is successful. Karen is very, very strong representative of her business. Turmeric Alive was here. Daniel Sullivan is a great example of the founder of the company living. He glows orange from turmeric. So you have to really be stubborn, persistent, and believe in your product. I mean, that I think is key.
Anything else?
No, those are the 2 biggies.
Yeah. Matt and I, we both see that stubbornness is absolutely necessary. And then the bookkeeping is very interesting as well, because we kind of talk and we joke, but we joke in fright.
Yeah, right. I know. We joked in fright for years. Yeah. I mean, after a while, you want to ignore the books because they're so scary. You don't even know what's in there.
No.
The other thing, I think, conserving capital. I'm a gadget guy. I'd love to buy the biggest, coolest machine to do something. And over 5 years, I've learned that what you want to do is make the simplest, cheapest substitute for the expensive machine you can possibly do and save the capital, because you need it for a tremendous amount of other things. And the machinery will come. And now I don't buy a machine until I've hired way too many guys to be doing the job. So it has to pay itself back in less than a year in labor savings. Otherwise, I'm not buying it.
Wow, so the efficiency, even if a machine is more efficient,
Yeah.
it's a lot of money.
No, because you can pay the labor cost week after week, but you can't lay out $10,000 for a small bottling machine up front. It's just, you need that capital because your distributor is not going to pay you for 30 days if you're lucky. Normally, they're not going to pay you for 60 days, and then they're going to take some kind of chargeback and discount, and you're helpless. And now you're out capital, and you can't pay your employees. You have to be able to take care of your team first. And then when it's absolutely essential and you have the extra money in the bag, or you find an investor, or some bank decides for some reason to give you a huge loan, then get the machine when you absolutely have to. I would run a second shift before I'd buy a bigger machine.
Great advice.
I have to say, it has been an incredible learning experience over the last 5 years working with all these companies. I mean, we've had more than 50 companies walk in and out of these doors, and unbelievable variety of products, and just it's been really cool, and I can't wait to see what happens tomorrow.
Yeah, I do have one kind of more follow-up general question. Next few years, where do you see New York headed in food? And I know you've mentioned you might want to expand this Organic Food Incubator to other cities. What are you excited about in the future?
I think the whole local food movement is really growing. I want to believe that it's not a fad. I mean, just from an environmental standpoint, I think it's really important to buy things locally. And so anything I can do to help that continue to grow, I think is something I definitely want to put my energy towards. And you see around, rental space is a huge hurdle for a small business to cross. So I think that and I know that there are a lot of small businesses around in some of the smaller cities around the country that could benefit from something like this, where if the entrepreneurs were given an affordable space to do something, that they would grow. And out of that, you end up with the flea markets and smaller industries, and a lot of organic activity grows up around that. So I definitely want to be a part of that.
Personally, I think that that's one of the biggest drivers of this incredible gentrification we're seeing around several core cities in the United States. I don't know what comes first, if it's first the luxury condos and then the organic stores, but
right.
I talked to Matt about this on our previous podcast. There are cold pressed juice places that are making Union Square these days. That's what people see Astor Place has these days in New York City. You see them in Brooklyn. They lead a little bit after some of this gentrification. It's fascinating, and I'm very, very interested in understanding too if it's a fad or not, because we both really want it to stick around,
right,
and have it actually trickle down to the food system overall.
Yeah,
and we can.
I mean, it's great that it happens where the cities are gentrified, but it would be also great if it would happen in some of the areas that aren't so well off. I mean, there is a huge growth in community gardens and people feeding each other out of these vacant spaces. And there's amazing things happening all over the country. And so if they were given an opportunity where they could take some of that product and make something locally, maybe in a community that wasn't so well off, then everybody would be better off.
Yeah, and I think actually Portland, dragging on a little bit here. I think Portland is a great example, though. It started in many ways some of the most creative things in the food movement in the U.S., and now companies are relocating to Portland. Like Airbnb is relocating to Portland. A lot of it's just, I think it's because of the quality of life, right?
Sure.
Sure. It's not bad. Yeah. Anyway, Mike, thanks so much.
Sure.
Great talk.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.